The gavel struck with a sharp crack, and the sound rolled across the Knox County courthouse like thunder over the Smoky Mountains. I sat frozen at the defense table, 35 years old, my heart hammering so hard I feared it would leap from my chest. The air smelled of polish and old paper, heavy and suffocating, as if the ghosts of 1,000 verdicts were pressing down on me. My hands gripped the folder on my lap until my knuckles whitened, the thin edges biting into my palms. Inside that folder was not just paper. It was the sum of 15 years of sacrifice, the difference between truth and lies, the weapon that could either destroy me or save me. Across the aisle, Daniel Carter sat with his shoulders squared, his chin raised high, his expensive navy suit perfectly tailored as if clothing could hide the rot inside. My brother, my own flesh and blood, 3 years older, the man who had dumped a helpless infant on my doorstep and vanished, now stared at me with eyes that gleamed not with guilt but with triumph. He looked like a man who believed he had already won. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering, smirking, as if this were some performance staged for the locals in the back benches. A few gasps, a few whispers traveled through the room. I caught words that cut like glass. Kidnapping. Thief. Stealing her brother's child. The judge adjusted his glasses, his expression stern but unreadable, then leaned forward, his voice echoing. "Ms. Carter, do you deny these kidnapping claims?" My breath caught. The word rang in my ears again, louder this time, crueler. Kidnapping. The accusation landed like a blow to the face, shocking, humiliating, tearing at every fiber of my being. My pulse thundered in my head, and for a second I thought the entire courthouse could hear the frantic beating. I wanted to scream that it was all a lie, that I had been the one who stayed, the one who fed that baby when Daniel disappeared into the night, the one who worked double shifts while still studying, the one who sold dreams of travel and freedom just to buy school shoes. But I sat silent, my lips pressed together, my body trembling under the weight of a word that had no right to touch me. I dared to glance back. Lily sat in the third row, 15 years old now. Her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles were white. Her long hair fell over her shoulders, her eyes locked on me with fear and trust mingled. She had heard it. She had heard the word. For 15 years I had protected her from the truth, painted her father as someone too lost to return, shielded her from the ugliness of abandonment. And now, in a crowded courtroom, my brother had forced her to hear her mother accused of kidnapping. My chest constricted so tightly I struggled to breathe. In that moment, the shame and rage mingled into something electric. My body remembered nights when I had rocked her while studying for exams, mornings when I had sent her off to school with a packed lunch, even when I had none for myself, evenings when I had pretended to smile while debt collectors called. And now the world looked at me as if I were the criminal. Daniel sat smug, his face the picture of false grief. He dabbed his eye with a folded handkerchief, pretending tears, and leaned closer to his lawyer, who nodded gravely. He turned toward the judge with a voice practiced and smooth. "Your Honor, I only want my daughter back. My sister has kept her from me for 15 years. She has denied me every chance to be a father." Murmurs swelled again, louder this time. Some heads shaking at me, others whispering that maybe he was right. My stomach knotted. Lies. Every word from his mouth was poison, and yet here, under oath, dressed in a suit and shielded by the title of father, he looked credible. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. The judge's gaze slid toward me again. "Ms. Carter, answer the question. Do you deny these kidnapping claims?" My throat burned. My lips parted, but before sound came, I caught another glimpse of Lily. Her lips moved ever so slightly, whispering, though no one else could hear. I read it. Mom. She was calling me Mom. My brother had abandoned her before she could crawl, but I had been there every step since. She knew the truth, but she was powerless to stop the storm her father had unleashed. My eyes blurred for a moment. I blinked hard, forcing the tears back, forcing the fire forward. If I spoke now, if I answered with denial, it would only be my word against his. The folder under my palm seemed to burn, begging to be opened, daring me to unleash the truth. Inside were the scraps of his betrayal, the note he had scribbled in haste, the messages where he demanded money, the proof that his claim of fatherly devotion was nothing but theater. Yet with those scraps came pain. Pain Lily had never faced words I had buried for her sake. The court leaned in, waiting. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint creak of wood as strangers shifted in their seats. Every eye bored into me. Every whisper pressed on me like a weight. Daniel smiled faintly, tilting his head as though he were already savoring victory. The injustice of it clawed at my chest. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands tremble. Then, like a spark in dry timber anger, flared into resolve. I straightened my back, my voice steadier than I thought possible. I turned my face toward the bench, toward the man in the black robe who held the power to decide my life and Lily's future. "If you were in my shoes, what would you do?" The words left my mouth not as a plea, but as a challenge. One I hurled past the judge, past the lawyer, straight into the conscience of every soul in that room. A murmur rippled sharp and uneasy. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at Daniel, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. The judge raised his brows, his pen pausing mid-note. The courtroom, thick with judgment only moments ago, seemed to tremble under the question. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt power stir inside me. I was not the accused. I was the mother who stayed, and I was ready to fight. 17 years earlier, I was 18 years old and thought the hardest part of my life would be balancing freshman classes at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville with my part-time shifts at Walmart. I lived in a small off-campus apartment, a one-bedroom space with peeling paint and a refrigerator that rattled louder than the traffic outside. Life was simple, tight, but manageable. I thought my biggest worries were midterm exams, finding money for books, and dreaming about a future that felt wide open. That illusion shattered on a stormy night in October. Rain pounded the windows with a fury that shook the glass. Thunder rolled in long waves across the hills, and every flash of lightning made the shadows in my tiny apartment jump. I was sitting at the small kitchen table surrounded by half-written notes for a sociology paper, a cup of cheap coffee going cold, when a frantic pounding shook my front door. At first, I thought it was the storm rattling the frame. But the pounding came again, sharp, desperate, almost like a fist begging for entry. I jumped, heart racing, and hurried to the door. When I pulled it open, the hallway light flickered over a sight that froze me in place. My brother Daniel stood there soaked to the bone, his jacket plastered against his body, his hair dripping, his eyes wild. And in his arms was a bundled infant, wrapped hastily in a thin blanket, her tiny face red with screaming. Lightning flashed behind him, and for a moment the scene looked like something from a nightmare. Daniel shoved the baby toward me before I could even speak. "Watch her for one night. I'll be back," he barked. His voice was clipped, hurried, like he was late for something more important. My hands rose automatically clumsy, and suddenly I was holding the trembling weight of a 3-month-old child. She was small, impossibly small, her cries shrill, her fists flailing against the thin fabric of the blanket. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask what was happening, but Daniel had already turned. "Daniel, wait, whose baby is this?" My voice cracked as I stepped into the hall. He did not answer. His boots splashed through the water pooling by the stairwell, his figure disappearing into the stairwell shadows. I heard the slam of the front entrance below, and then nothing but the roar of the storm. I stood there, stunned, the baby crying louder in my arms, the echo of his words ringing in my ears. Watch her for one night. He would be back. That is what he said. My mind spun. Could this be his child, the result of one of his reckless flings, the consequence of nights I had long stopped keeping track of? He had always been impulsive, chasing fast thrills, gambling, drinking, running from responsibility. But this was something else entirely. A baby, flesh and blood. I staggered back into my apartment, shutting the door with my shoulder, and looked down at the infant. Her face was scrunched, her mouth wide, her tiny lungs filling the room with desperate wails. My hands shook as I tried to cradle her properly. I knew nothing about caring for an infant. The closest I had come was babysitting for a neighbor back in high school, and even then, it was for toddlers, not a fragile 3-month-old. Panic surged. What did babies eat? How often did they sleep? How do you even change a diaper? My gaze darted around my apartment as if the answers could be found hidden between my textbooks and piles of laundry. The diaper bag Daniel had dropped on the floor offered little hope. I dug through it with one hand, balancing the baby awkwardly against my chest. Inside, I found a half-empty can of formula, a few diapers, a bottle with dried milk crusted on the rim, and one spare onesie. No note, no instructions, nothing to suggest this was temporary, nothing to guide me through the night. The storm outside roared as I fumbled to boil water scoop formula and mix it as best as I could. The baby's cries sharpened, slicing through my nerves, fraying them until tears pricked my eyes. "It's okay. It's okay. I've got you," I whispered, my voice trembling as much as my hands. I pressed the bottle against her lips, relief flooding me when she latched and began to drink in small gulps. My shoulders sagged. Her tiny fingers curled around mine, her eyes half closing, and for the first time that night, I looked closely at her. She had a soft, round face, faint wisps of dark hair plastered to her damp forehead, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Something in my chest shifted. Despite the panic, despite the betrayal of my brother vanishing into the storm, there was no denying the pull of that fragile life depending entirely on me. Hours bled together. I rocked her until my arms ached, changed her diaper with clumsy fingers, and hummed tunelessly to quiet her cries. My textbooks sat abandoned on the table, my paper forgotten, the clock ticking past midnight and into the small hours. Every time thunder rattled the windows, I glanced toward the door, half expecting Daniel to come back, half dreading what I would say if he did. But he never returned. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean, but leaving me hollow. The baby finally slept in a bundle of blankets on my couch, her tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I sank into the chair across from her, exhaustion crushing me, questions swirling. Where had Daniel gone? What had he gotten himself into this time? Did he even plan to return? The answers never came. Days turned into weeks. That baby became Lily, a name I whispered to her in the quiet moments, a name that fit her delicate presence. I juggled classes, shifts, and diapers with a desperation I had never known. Every call to Daniel went unanswered, his phone disconnected. Letters to the last address I had bounced back unopened. And when I called my mother Ruth in Nashville, hoping for guidance, her voice was cold. "It's your mess now," she said before hanging up. I stared at the receiver in disbelief. My own mother had abandoned me to this fate. Alone at 18, I had become the sole protector of a child that was not mine. Nights blurred with feedings and tears, mornings with exhaustion and fear. Yet in the midst of chaos, something grew. Lily's eyes began to follow me. Her cries softened when I held her. Her laughter bubbled up in moments that pierced the fog of exhaustion. She clung to me as if she knew I was her only anchor. And slowly, against all reason, against the certainty that I was unprepared and too young, I loved her. The night Daniel abandoned her had been a storm, but what followed was a storm of another kind, one that reshaped me forever. Those first months after Daniel disappeared felt like a long blur where each day bled into the next, and survival became my only goal. At 18 years old, I should have been studying for exams, complaining about cafeteria food, dreaming about internships or summer trips with friends. Instead, I was learning how to sterilize bottles in a cramped kitchen sink, how to stretch a paycheck from Walmart across diapers and formula, how to carry a crying infant on my hip while trying to finish assignments by the glow of a cheap desk lamp. I would wake before dawn to the sound of Lily's cries and stumble out of bed, my body aching from too little sleep, my mind foggy from exhaustion. I learned to mix formula in the dark to soothe her with gentle rocking, even when my arms shook with fatigue. I would lay her down for brief naps and then race to class, praying she would stay asleep long enough for me to scribble a few pages of notes or take a test before rushing home again. My life was a constant sprint, and no matter how fast I ran, I was always behind. Daniel's silence stretched into weeks. Every day I checked my phone, half expecting a call, half dreading what excuse he would give, but the phone stayed silent. The one time I reached him months later, his voice was slurred, dismissive. "She's not my problem anymore. You're good at that mother stuff. Keep her." Then the line went dead and my stomach dropped into a pit so deep I thought I might never climb out. That sentence, careless and cruel, sealed my fate. It was not just one night, not just one storm. It was forever. When I turned to my mother for help dialing her number with trembling hands, she cut me down with a cold laugh. "You always wanted to play grown-up Emily? Now you have your chance. It's your mess now." Her words slammed into me with the same force as the storm that had rattled my windows that night. I hung up, shaking the weight of betrayal pressing heavier than ever. I had been abandoned twice, once by my brother, once by my mother. I was utterly alone. Knoxville was not kind to young women carrying babies on their hips. At Walmart, co-workers gave me pitying looks, some offering advice I had not asked for, others whispering that I had ruined my life before it even began. Professors grew tired of my late assignments, my excuses about sick babies and babysitters who canceled. My grades slipped, and eventually I had to withdraw from 2 classes because I could not keep up. Each withdrawal felt like another piece of my old life crumbling, another dream slipping through my fingers. Yet amid the exhaustion and despair, there were moments of piercing light. Lily's first smile came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was changing her diaper, a messy, smelly task that had left me on the verge of tears. She looked up, her dark eyes catching mine, and suddenly her lips curled into a small but undeniable smile. My breath caught and tears spilled down my cheeks for a different reason. In that instant, I knew I could endure anything, any sleepless night, any cruel word, any sacrifice, because she was worth it. By the time I turned 19, I had found a rhythm, if you could call it that. Mornings started with hurried feedings, then a rush to drop Lily with a neighbor willing to babysit for a few dollars while I went to work. Afternoons were for classes when I could manage evenings for laundry, dinner, and homework. My apartment became cluttered with bottles, stacks of diapers, second-hand clothes from thrift stores. The walls echoed with Lily's laughter and her cries with lullabies. I hummed off-key with whispered prayers that I would somehow find a way to give her more than this. Bills piled up, and I learned to stretch every dollar. I ate ramen noodles for weeks so that Lily could have fresh fruit. I wore the same worn shoes for 2 years while saving for her first sturdy pair. Every sacrifice became a strange point of pride. I was young, poor, and terrified, but I was doing it. I was mothering a child who had been dropped into my arms without warning, and against all odds, she was thriving. Then came the darker moments. One evening, when Lily was nearly 2 years old, Daniel appeared without warning. He smelled of alcohol, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He swayed slightly as he leaned in the doorway, grinning. "How's my kid?" he slurred, as if he had any right to ask. My body went cold. I blocked the entrance with my arm, clutching Lily close to my chest. She buried her face against me, sensing the tension. "You left her, Daniel. You don't get to show up and act like this." I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. His grin faded into a sneer. He lunged as if to snatch Lily, but I twisted away, heart pounding. "You'll regret stealing my kid," he spat before staggering back into the night. I stood shaking in the doorway, the echo of his threat burning into my bones. That night, I sat awake long after Lily had fallen asleep, staring at her tiny face, my chest tight with fear. The police report I filed the next day brought little comfort. They noted the incident gave him a warning, but in their eyes, it was a family matter, not a crime. I was left to wonder when he would come back, when the next storm would hit. Yet the fear also hardened something inside me. If Daniel thought he could scare me into giving up, he had underestimated me. He had underestimated the fire that grew each time Lily called me Mommy, each time I saw her take another step, speak, another word, smile, another smile. I was not going to let him win. Not then. Not ever. The years between 18 and 23 aged me more than any decade could. My friends drifted away, their lives full of parties and road trips, while mine revolved around daycare schedules and night shifts. I watched through the window as other students walked freely across campus with backpacks slung over their shoulders, and I felt a pang of loss. But when I looked at Lily playing on the floor with blocks laughing as she built crooked towers, the pang softened. My path was different, harder, lonelier, but it was mine, and she was mine too in every way that mattered. The struggle was relentless. Some nights I broke down sobbing quietly into my pillow so Lily would not hear. Other nights I felt almost invincible, fueled by the fierce determination that I would prove everyone wrong. And always, always, there was the shadow of Daniel lurking somewhere out there, a reminder that this fragile piece could shatter at any moment. Looking back now, I see those years as the crucible that forged me. The girl who had once worried about midterms and cafeteria food was gone. In her place stood a young woman who knew the weight of responsibility, who carried the scars of abandonment, but who also carried the strength of unconditional love. I had not chosen this path, but I had chosen to walk it with Lily, and that choice defined everything that followed. By the time I turned 20, most girls my age were chasing degrees and boyfriends, figuring out internships and experimenting with the freedom that young adulthood offered. I was chasing coupons at the grocery store, clipping them with tired hands after 12-hour shifts, praying that the discounts would stretch my paycheck far enough to cover formula rent and electricity. My backpack no longer carried textbooks and dreams. It carried diapers, bottles, and crumpled bills. My schedule revolved not around college parties or football games, but around Lily's nap times and the endless needs of a growing child. Yet in the middle of the chaos, something strange happened. My determination hardened into steel. I realized that if I was going to build a life for both of us, I needed more than part-time jobs. I needed a career. That realization pushed me into nursing classes at night, classes designed for working adults, though most of my classmates were in their 30s or 40s, people with families and mortgages. I sat among them only 20, clutching my worn notebook, feeling like an imposter. But every time I thought about giving up, I thought of Lily. I thought of her wide eyes watching me leave for work, her little hands reaching out when I returned, the way she clung to me when thunder rattled the windows. She deserved stability. She deserved more than a life of hand-me-downs and fear, so I pushed forward. The nights were brutal. I would clock out from my shift at Walmart or later at the hospital where I landed a janitorial job, rush home to pick up Lily from the neighbor who babysat, feed her, bathe. Her tuck her into bed, and then crack open my textbooks while exhaustion clawed at my mind. Sometimes I would fall asleep at the table, my pen still in hand, only to jolt awake when Lily cried. My grades were not perfect, but I clawed my way through. Slowly, piece by piece, I was building a future. But Daniel's shadow never disappeared. His visits were rare, but always explosive, like sudden storms breaking a fragile calm. One night, when I was 21, I heard a pounding at the door. My stomach dropped because I knew that sound too well. When I opened it, Daniel was there, swaying slightly, the stench of alcohol rolling off him. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt stained. "Where's my kid?" he demanded, his voice loud enough to wake the neighbors. Lily, then 3 years old, clutched her stuffed bunny and peered out from behind my leg, her lower lip trembling. I stepped in front of her, my arms spread as if my body alone could shield her from his chaos. "You left her, Daniel. You don't get to call her yours now." My voice shook, but my stance held. He sneered, his face twisting with anger. "You think you're better than me. You think you can take what's mine. You'll regret this." He shoved past me, staggering into the small living room, his eyes scanning for Lily. Panic surged through me. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back with a strength I did not know I had. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice breaking, tears hot in my eyes. He shoved me hard enough that I stumbled, but the noise had already woken a neighbor. Within minutes, the police were at the door, their flashlights sweeping across the scene. Daniel was belligerent, slurring, yelling about his rights. The officers escorted him out, but in the end, it was nothing more than a warning. A family dispute, they called it. Nothing criminal. He was free to return whenever he pleased. That night, after the door shut, I sank to the floor, shaking Lily crawling into my lap with wide, frightened eyes. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, though nothing felt okay. That incident etched itself into my bones. I realized then that I could not just survive. I had to be vigilant, always ready, always braced for the next storm Daniel would bring. The stress took its toll. My hair began to thin from exhaustion, my weight fluctuated, and I felt decades older than my 21 years. But Lily was thriving. She grew taller, her laughter brighter, her little voice clear as she called me Mommy with complete certainty. That word fueled me when nothing else could. It was proof that love not blood defined family. Still, the loneliness cut deep. I watched other young women post pictures of vacations, of engagement rings, of carefree smiles. My world was diapers, night shifts, and the gnawing fear of Daniel's next move. Friends drifted away. Invitations stopped. I was too busy, too tired, too consumed. Some nights after Lily was asleep, I would stare at the ceiling and let silent tears roll down my cheeks. I grieved the life I had lost, the girl I had been before the stormy night when Daniel knocked on my door. Yet every time I considered what might have been, I looked at Lily's sleeping face and knew I would not trade her for any of it. By 22, I had moved us into a slightly larger apartment, a 2-bedroom unit with thin walls, but enough space for Lily to have her own room. I painted the walls a soft yellow with leftover paint a coworker gave me, and we decorated it with paper butterflies Lily had cut out in preschool. It was not much, but it was ours. I took on more shifts at the hospital scrubbing floors, emptying trash bins, anything to keep the paycheck steady. The nurses noticed my determination and encouraged me, telling me that I had the heart for the work. Their words planted hope. One day, maybe I could stand beside them as a nurse, not just as a janitor. But hope was fragile, and Daniel's presence remained like a splinter. He showed up less frequently, but when he did, it was always with threats, always with demands. One afternoon, he cornered me outside the hospital parking lot. His eyes darted nervously, his voice sharp. "You owe me. That kid is my ticket, and you're keeping her from me." My hands tightened around the strap of my bag, fear clawing at my throat. "She is not your ticket, Daniel. She is a child. She deserves love, not to be used." He laughed bitterly, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "We'll see about that." Then he vanished again, leaving me shaking in the fading light. The unpredictability of his appearances gnawed at me. I never knew when he might reemerge, what state he would be in, what damage he might try to inflict. Yet through it all, Lily flourished. She started kindergarten, her backpack nearly as big as she was, her excitement spilling over as she described her teacher and new friends. I stood in the doorway that first morning, tears blurring my vision as I watched her walk into the school, so small, yet so brave. In that moment, I knew every sacrifice had been worth it. She was building a life beyond the shadows of our family's dysfunction. At 23, I passed my final exams for the nursing program. It had taken years of stolen hours of studying during Lily's naps of fighting exhaustion, but I had done it. I walked across the small stage in the community college auditorium, my heart swelling as Lily cheered from the audience, her little hands clapping wildly. She ran to me afterward, wrapping her arms around my waist. "I'm proud of you, Mommy," she said, her voice muffled against my gown. Those words washed away years of pain, if only for a moment. But Daniel's warning still echoed in my ears, a storm cloud on the horizon. I knew he would return. I just did not know when. By the time I reached 25, the years of exhaustion and sacrifice had etched themselves into every line of my face, every ache in my back, every tremor in my tired hands. Most people at 25 were still searching for who they wanted to be. I had no such luxury. I had been someone's mother for 7 years, not by choice, but by necessity, and that role consumed every inch of me. Lily was in 2nd grade at South Knoxville Elementary, a bright child with endless curiosity. She had a love for science, always asking questions about how the world worked, why the sky was blue, why her heart beat faster when she ran. She carried a backpack covered in patches and pins I stitched on from thrift store finds, and every morning she skipped down the sidewalk with a bounce in her step that made me ache with pride. But behind her laughter, I felt the weight of every dollar I had to stretch, every unpaid bill I had to juggle. Being her mother was joy and terror in equal measure. Joy because she lit up my world, terror because I knew how fragile our life was, how one emergency could shatter it. My nursing certification had given me a foothold at Knoxville General Hospital, where I started working regular shifts. The pay was better than scrubbing floors, but it was nowhere near enough for the two of us, not with rent rising, not with food prices climbing, not with medical copays whenever Lily caught a cold or needed shots. I picked up extra shifts whenever possible, sometimes working 16 hours straight. I would come home long after dark, my feet swollen, my eyes burning, only to find Lily asleep on the couch with her homework scattered around her waiting for me. The guilt was a constant gnawing presence. I wanted to be at every bedtime to read her every story to answer every one of her endless questions, but bills did not pay themselves. Sometimes I would collapse into the couch beside her, smoothing her hair as tears slid silently down my cheeks. She deserved more. She deserved better. Yet even in my darkest hours, she never let me feel like a failure. She would wake in the morning, rub her eyes, and greet me with a smile that melted every ounce of exhaustion. "I love you, Mommy," she would say, as if it was the simplest truth in the world. And maybe it was. Daniel was still out there somewhere in Knoxville's underbelly, chasing his addictions, burning bridges, destroying what little remained of his reputation. But I never stopped watching over my shoulder. I knew he still thought of Lily as a possession, a ticket, a tool. He had no interest in her happiness, only in what she could give him. That knowledge haunted me. I kept every school form, every medical record, every scrap of paper that listed me as her guardian, tucked neatly in folders that I updated obsessively. It was my shield against him, my proof that I was the one who stayed. Still, fear lingered. I remembered too vividly the night he had tried to grab her, the rage in his eyes, when he accused me of stealing his child. The memory kept me awake many nights, my ears tuned to every creak in the apartment building, every sound in the hallway. The financial strain pressed harder with each passing year. Groceries devoured more of my paycheck than I ever thought possible. Lily needed school supplies, new shoes, clothes that fit her growing frame. I hunted thrift stores, clipped coupons, accepted hand-me-downs from coworkers with quiet gratitude. My own needs fell to the bottom of every list. I wore the same pair of scrubs until the fabric thinned, cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror, skipped meals so Lily could have seconds. It was not martyrdom, it was survival. The hospital staff became my second family in a way. Nurses who saw my determination helped where they could, slipping me advice covering shifts so I could attend Lily's parent-teacher conferences, bringing over casseroles on nights when they knew I was running on fumes. They reminded me that not all family was blood. Some family you built with shared burdens and compassion. Still, loneliness lingered. At 25, most women were dating. Some were marrying, some starting families of their own by choice. My life was already full and yet empty in a different way. I had no time for relationships, no room for dreams beyond survival. Every decision circled back to Lily. What school would be best for her? What doctor? What future? Love, romance, companionship. Those were luxuries I could not afford. My social life was a handful of brief conversations with neighbors or coworkers, but my world revolved around Lily, and she never made me regret it. Yet the cracks showed in quiet moments. Late at night, when Lily slept, I would sit in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at the growing stack of bills, my chest tight. I wondered how long I could keep this up. I was young, but felt old. I was alive, but barely living. And always at the edge of my thoughts was Daniel. I had not seen him in months, but his absence did not bring peace. It brought dread. Because I knew he would return, and every day that passed without his presence was one day closer to the storm he would bring. That fear bled into my parenting. When teachers asked about Lily's father, I lied with practiced ease. "He travels for work," I would say, forcing a smile. When Lily asked questions, I dodged them. "He is busy, but I am here." The lies tasted bitter, but the truth would have poisoned her innocence. I wanted her to believe she was wanted, that she was cherished. I wanted to protect her from the knowledge that her father had walked away, that he saw her as a burden. My lies were not perfect shields, but they bought her a childhood fragile as it was. At 25, the balance of fear and love defined every day. Fear of Daniel. Fear of failure. Fear of the bills stacked on the counter. Love for Lily. Love that burned so fiercely it kept me moving, even when exhaustion threatened to crush me. It was a life built on sacrifice, but also on resilience. And though I often felt like I was drowning, every smile from Lily reminded me that I was also keeping both of us afloat. Looking back now, those years were a crucible. They burned away illusions, stripped me of selfishness, and forged me into someone harder, stronger. I was not the carefree college girl I once imagined I would be. I was a mother forged in fire, bound by love, defined by sacrifice. And though I feared the day Daniel would reappear, I also knew something else. I was no longer the naive 18-year-old who had opened the door to a storm and been handed a crying infant. I was stronger now, and if he came back, he would not find me unprepared. By the time I turned 30, I had lived what felt like 3 different lives. The girl I used to be, the one with notebooks and dreams of independence, had vanished long ago. In her place stood a woman carved by years of sacrifice, fear, and endurance. I was no longer simply Emily Carter, the little sister who got left holding the mess. I had become a mother in every sense, though not by blood. And by 30, Lily was 12 years old, standing taller than my shoulder. Her long hair pulled back in a ponytail, her eyes filled with the kind of intelligence and drive that made teachers stop and take notice. She loved science just as she always had, spending hours reading about medicine, about the body, about cures for diseases. When she told me she wanted to be a pediatrician, my throat tightened with pride and sorrow. Pride because she was dreaming so much bigger than I ever dared. Sorrow because I feared whether I could give her the stability she needed to get there. Life at 30 was not easy, but for the first time in years, it felt somewhat steady. I had worked my way into a permanent nursing position at Knoxville General Hospital. It was not glamorous and it was not rich, but it was steady. My shifts were grueling, often 12 hours on my feet, tending to patients, managing emergencies, watching life and death brush shoulders every day. Yet the paycheck was reliable. The benefits allowed me to keep Lily insured, and the co-workers who had once been mentors had become friends. I had carved out a life, fragile though it was, where Lily and I could breathe without constantly choking on fear. Our apartment was still modest, but it was stable. Lily had her own room, her own desk, her own stack of books and drawings taped to the wall. She joined the school science club, stayed after class to work on projects, and came home brimming with excitement. She laughed more, worried less, and her confidence bloomed in a way that filled me with hope. For a while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe Daniel had disappeared for good, swallowed by his addictions and failures, too far gone to ever claw his way back into our lives. There were stretches of months, even years, when I did not hear his name, when no drunken phone calls rattled me awake, when no sudden pounding came at the door. During those years, I let myself imagine a future free of his shadow. I dared to relax, though never fully. At night, I still locked the doors, twice, still checked the windows, still kept the folders of documents in a fireproof box under my bed. Guardianship papers, school forms, medical records, every piece of evidence that I had been Lily's mother in all but name. They were my shield, my proof, my lifeline. I prayed I would never need to use them. Turning 30 felt like standing on a cliff between exhaustion and possibility. I had survived 12 years of raising a child I had never planned for, survived Daniel's chaos, survived the judgment of strangers and the silence of my own mother. I had survived, period, and that in itself felt like a victory. Yet even as I breathed in the fragile calm, I could not shake the sense that it was temporary, that the storm had not vanished, but merely waited over the horizon. Sometimes at night, I would lie awake and feel that old knot of fear tighten in my chest, the whisper of Daniel's threats echoing in the dark. "You will regret this. You will regret stealing my kid." Those words lingered like a curse. Still, I pressed forward. Lily thrived in middle school, her teachers praising her dedication, her friends filling our apartment with laughter during sleepovers. She was becoming a young woman, thoughtful and determined, and I could not help but marvel at how far we had come. I watched her laugh in the yard with friends chasing after a soccer ball, and I thought about that stormy night 17 years ago when she had been placed in my arms. The baby who had screamed through the thunder was now a young girl who dreamed of medicine, who carried herself with a strength that reminded me of the battles we had fought together. At 30, I let myself feel something I had not dared to before: hope. Hope that maybe I could keep her safe all the way into adulthood, that maybe the past would not return to tear us apart, that maybe love could outlast even the most toxic family bonds. For a brief window of time, life seemed to prove me right. My job steadied us. Lily's grades soared. Our little apartment felt like a home full of drawings, laughter, and the steady rhythm of a life built from struggle but held together by love. Yet deep down I knew the calm was fragile, and it would not last. By the time I turned 33, I thought maybe the storm had passed for good. Lily was 15 now, tall and confident, excelling in school. Her notebooks filled with sketches of organs and diagrams from her science classes. She talked often about college, about becoming a pediatrician, about helping children who felt as small and vulnerable as she once had been. I felt proud in a way that words could never capture. I had given up so much, but looking at her, I believed it had been worth every lost hour of sleep, every dollar sacrificed, every tear shed in the dark. But peace is a fragile thing, and in my family, it was never built to last. It started one afternoon when the doorbell rang. I was preparing dinner, tired from a long shift, and Lily was at the table working through her math homework. When I opened the door, the sight froze me in place. Daniel stood there. For a heartbeat, my mind could not reconcile what I was seeing. He looked nothing like the drunk who had staggered into my apartment years earlier. He wore a navy suit, pressed and expensive. His hair was cut short, his face clean-shaven. Beside him stood a man in another suit, his leather briefcase gleaming. Daniel's eyes locked on mine, cold and certain, and then his mouth curved into a smile that was more predator than brother. "Emily," he said smoothly, "this is my attorney, Mr. Collins. We are here about my daughter." The words sent ice through my veins. My daughter. Lily had looked up at the sound, her pencil frozen in her hand, her expression confused and uneasy. She had never once in her life referred to him as father, never once received a birthday card or phone call, never once felt his presence except as a shadow. Yet here he was speaking as if she had always been his, as if the 15 years I had poured into raising her were nothing. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame so tightly I thought my knuckles would split. "You left her, Daniel. You walked away." My voice trembled, but I refused to step back. He smirked, unbothered. His lawyer cleared his throat and handed me a thick envelope. "Ms. Carter, my client is filing for custody of his daughter, Lily Carter, claiming unlawful detainment and denial of paternal rights. We expect your full cooperation with the upcoming court proceedings." My hands shook as I took the envelope. The papers inside were heavy, stamped with the seal of the Knox County Court. I scanned the words, and my stomach churned. Custody petition, kidnapping allegations, estate disputes. My vision blurred. Daniel spoke again, his tone calm but cutting. "I think it is time things were set right. You kept her from me long enough." Rage flared inside me. "You abandoned her," I spat. "You dumped her on me like baggage and vanished. Do not stand here and pretend otherwise." For the first time, his smile faltered, but only for a second. Then he leaned in closer, his voice low, so Lily could not hear. "That house in Nashville, the one Mom and Dad left us. It is worth $420,000 now. Custody of Lily gives me leverage in the estate. You cannot stop this, Emily. I will win." He pulled back, his eyes glinting with greed. My hands tightened around the envelope. So that was it. Not love, not fatherhood, not redemption. Money. Always money. He wanted custody not because he cared for Lily, but because she was a bargaining chip, a key to unlock his claim on the house. My stomach twisted a mix of fury and fear. Lily had risen from her chair, her eyes wide, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. She had heard enough to understand the danger. Daniel glanced at her but did not smile. He did not even look at her the way a father should. To him, she was not a daughter. She was a tool. After they left, I shut the door and sank against it, my body shaking violently. Lily rushed to me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice frightened. I pulled her close, stroking her hair, trying to steady my voice. "Your uncle is trying to take you away, but I will not let that happen. We are family. Nothing he says changes that." She nodded, though fear clouded her eyes. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the papers heavy on the table beside me. Daniel had returned not as a drunken threat, but as a man with money lawyers and a plan. He had turned his neglect into a weapon, twisting it into an accusation that I had stolen his child. The injustice burned so hot inside me I thought it would consume me. I had sacrificed my youth, my dreams, my peace, all for Lily, and now he dared to call me a criminal. But fear did not break me. It hardened me. If Daniel wanted a war, then I would fight. I called a lawyer the next morning, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, recommended by a nurse at the hospital. She was sharp, direct, and unflinching. I laid out my story, my years of raising Lily, the threats, the abandonment. She listened carefully, then nodded. We can fight this, Emily, but it will not be easy. He has money. He will try to bury you in lies. We need evidence. We need witnesses. We need everything. Her words were sobering, but her confidence steadied me. For weeks, I gathered everything I could. Old text messages from Daniel where he told me Lily was not his problem. Medical records where I had signed as guardian. School forms with my name as parent. Neighbors who remembered the night he stumbled drunk and tried to grab her, who remembered the police arriving. Every scrap of proof that he had abandoned his daughter, that I had stepped in not as a thief, but as the only person who cared. The most powerful piece came unexpectedly. An old neighbor, Mr. Bill, handed me a dusty VHS tape. "You might want to look at this," he said. On it was footage from a neighborhood barbecue years ago. Daniel was drunk, laughing with a beer in hand, his words slurred but clear. "That kid ain't mine. Emily can keep her. Better her problem than mine." My heart pounded as I watched tears blurring my vision. It was damning, undeniable. The arrogance in his voice, the cruelty in his laugh, the utter dismissal of his own daughter. That tape became my weapon. All the while, Lily watched me with wide eyes. She was old enough now to understand more than I wanted her to. She saw the strain in my face, the fear in my sleepless nights. One evening, she sat beside me at the kitchen table, her voice soft. "Mom, he is not going to win, is he?" My throat tightened. I took her hand, squeezing it firmly. "No, baby, he is not going to win. I will protect you. Always." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. In that moment, I knew the stakes were more than legal. This was about her sense of safety, her trust in me, her entire foundation. If Daniel ripped that away, it would scar her forever. The weeks before the trial were suffocating. Every knock at the door made me jump. Every letter in the mail felt like a threat. Yet amid the fear, something else grew inside me. Determination. Daniel might have money and lawyers, but I had something stronger. I had the truth. I had the love of a daughter who knew me as her mother, and I had 15 years of sacrifice etched into every record, every witness, every scar. The day of court loomed closer, and as I packed my folder with evidence, I whispered to myself again and again, "You are not the girl who opened the door to a storm. You are the woman who survived it, and you are ready to win." The day of the hearing arrived heavy with humidity, the kind of Tennessee morning where the air itself feels swollen and restless. I woke before dawn, my chest tight with dread. Lily stirred in her bed, her long hair tangled across the pillow, and for a moment I considered letting her stay home, protecting her from the storm that was about to unfold. But she was 15 now, and she insisted on being there, insisted on speaking if they asked her to. I smoothed her hair and whispered that we would get through it together. My own reflection in the bathroom mirror startled me. Lines etched deeper around my eyes, a stiffness in my jaw, a paleness that betrayed the weeks of sleepless nights. I slipped into a plain navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing bold, just steady and respectful as Sarah Mitchell had advised. I clutched the folder of evidence so tightly that my fingers went numb on the drive to the courthouse. Each page inside felt like a weapon, forged from years of sacrifice waiting for its moment. When we arrived, the Knox County Courthouse loomed above us, its stone steps crowded with curious onlookers, neighbors, even a few reporters sniffing around for a story of family betrayal. Their whispers followed us inside like a trail of smoke. Kidnapping, custody, house worth nearly $500,000. The scandal of it all clung to me as I walked through the metal detector, Lily at my side, her eyes darting nervously to the crowd. In the courtroom itself, the tension was a living thing. The polished wood gleamed under harsh lights, and every bench was filled with locals whispering as though attending a play. I took my seat beside Sarah, her posture straight, her expression calm but fierce. She touched my arm briefly, a silent anchor. Across the aisle, Daniel sat with his lawyer, Mr. Collins, both of them polished and composed. Daniel's suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair slicked back. He looked like a man reborn, a man ready to rewrite history with charm and lies. He even dabbed his eyes with a folded handkerchief before the proceedings began practicing the theater of fatherly grief. I wanted to leap across the aisle and rip the mask off him to shout the truth for everyone to hear. But I clenched my jaw and sat still, waiting for the moment the mask would crack on its own. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." Judge Thomas Everett entered, a stern man in his 60s with sharp eyes that swept across the courtroom like searchlights. We sat as he took his place at the bench, his gavel tapping once, commanding silence. "We are here to address the custody petition of Mr. Daniel Carter concerning his daughter, Lily." "Carter," he began, his voice deep and deliberate. "Mr. Carter alleges unlawful custody and denial of paternal rights. Ms. Emily Carter contests these claims." My name, spoken aloud in that chamber, carried the weight of both accusation and defense. Daniel's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth and confident. He painted Daniel as a man who had made mistakes but had reformed, a father eager to reconnect with the daughter stolen from him. "For 15 years, Your Honor, my client has been denied access to his own child," Collins declared, gesturing toward Daniel, who lowered his head as if stricken with grief. "He has turned his life around to secured employment and is ready to provide a stable home. Ms. Carter, though well-intentioned, has deprived him of his rights. We ask that custody be restored to the biological father." The words sliced through me like knives, lies wrapped in silk. I felt the murmurs of the courtroom ripple, some nodding at the polished story. For a moment, I wanted to shrink, to vanish. Then Sarah rose, her presence commanding. She did not waste words. "Your Honor, we intend to show clear evidence that Mr. Carter voluntarily abandoned his daughter 15 years ago, that Ms. Emily Carter has raised Lily Carter with no support from him, and that his motives for this custody claim are not paternal love, but financial gain tied to estate disputes. We will prove that Lily Carter's welfare has always rested with Emily Carter, and that remains the truth today." My pulse steadied at her words. This was not just a fight. It was my story sharpened and set free. Collins called Daniel to the stand first. He walked with careful steps, lowering his head humbly, his voice soft as he swore to tell the truth. Then he began his performance. He spoke of regret, of sleepless nights spent thinking of his daughter, of letters he claimed to have written but never sent. He spoke of addiction as an illness now conquered, of a new job in Dallas, of stability earned through suffering. "I only want my daughter to know me," he said, his voice catching. A single tear slid down his cheek. I almost laughed at the audacity, but the sound would have been bitter. Whispers surged across the benches, the locals moved by his act. My nails dug into my palm as I fought to stay composed. Then Sarah stood, her voice calm, but edged like steel. "Mr. Carter, you claim you were denied access to Lily. Do you recognize this?" She held up a faded scrap of paper, the note he had left in the diaper bag 17 years ago. "That is your handwriting, is it not?" Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "I was in a bad place," he muttered. "That was temporary. Read it aloud, please." Sarah pressed. He swallowed. His voice was flat as he read, "I will be back soon." "Thanks, Emily." Gasps rippled through the room. Sarah's voice sharpened. "And were you back soon, Mr. Carter? Did you return in one day? 1 week? 1 year?" Silence. Daniel's eyes darted his lawyer, shifting uneasily. Sarah did not relent. She moved on to the text messages projected on the screen for everyone to see. Daniel's words glared in harsh black letters. "She ain't my problem anymore. I need cash, not questions." Each message read aloud by Sarah landed like hammer blows, stripping away his polished mask. Whispers turned from sympathetic to sharp, judgmental, condemning. Daniel's shoulders stiffened, his charm slipping. Sarah called witnesses next. Neighbors testified about his drunken visits, his threats the night the police were called. Their words painted a portrait of neglect and violence, not fatherhood. Daniel squirmed, his lawyer objecting, but Judge Everett overruled again and again. Then Sarah unveiled the VHS tape. The old footage flickered to life on the screen. Daniel, years younger, beer in hand, laughter slurring his words. "That kid ain't mine. Emily can keep her. Better her problem than mine." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sorrow, but of vindication. At last, the truth was out for all to see. Daniel's face drained of color. His lawyer stammered objections, but the damage was done. The whispers in the gallery turned to disgust, to outrage, to pity for Lily and me. Then, the moment I had dreaded and hoped for arrived. The judge asked to hear from Lily. My heart froze, but she stood her legs trembling, her hands clenched into fists. She walked to the stand, her eyes darting to me, and I gave her the smallest nod. Her voice quivered at first, but grew stronger with every word. "Emily is my mom. She has always been my mom. He was never there. He never called. He never cared. I do not want to live with him. I want to stay with her." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and the silence in the room was thick, broken only by sniffles from the gallery. I could barely breathe, pride and sorrow colliding in my chest. Sarah closed with quiet force. "Your Honor, this case is not about biology. It is about love, sacrifice, and truth. For 15 years, Emily Carter has given everything for Lily Carter. Daniel Carter gave nothing but abandonment. The evidence speaks for itself. Lily speaks for herself. The choice is clear." I gripped the edge of the table, my body trembling. Around me, the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Daniel sat stiff, his face contorted in anger, his mask fully shattered. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, real fear. And in that moment, I knew. The truth had broken through his lies. The courtroom felt like it had stopped breathing after Lily's testimony. She had stepped down from the witness stand, her shoulders trembling, but her chin lifted and returned to sit beside me. I reached for her hand under the table and felt her fingers wrap around mine with a strength I had never known she possessed. My heart ached with pride, with sorrow, with the unbearable knowledge that my daughter had been forced to expose wounds she never should have carried. The silence stretched until Judge Everett cleared his throat and leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the bench. His face was grave, his eyes unreadable, but there was a tension in his jaw that told me the weight of this case had pressed on him as heavily as it had on me. Daniel sat stiffly across the aisle, his face pale now, his earlier confidence drained away. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Daniel's eyes darted toward the gallery, where locals were shaking their heads, their whispers sharp with condemnation. He knew just as I knew that the tide had turned. Judge Everett's voice cut through the air, firm and deliberate. "I have heard testimony from both parties. I have reviewed the evidence presented. This case is not simple, but the law requires me to decide based on the best interests of the child and on the credibility of the claims made." His gaze swept first toward Daniel. "Mr. Carter, you claimed you were denied access to your daughter for 15 years, yet the evidence shows otherwise. The note you left, the text messages you sent, the video recording of your own words, all demonstrate a willful abandonment, not denial of access. Your credibility has been gravely undermined." Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists clenched on the table, but he said nothing. The judge turned his gaze to me, and I felt my heart stutter in my chest. "Ms. Carter, you have carried the responsibility of raising Lily Carter since infancy. You provided food, shelter, education, medical care, and emotional stability. Witnesses corroborated your role. The child herself, now 15, has spoken clearly of her attachment and preference. The court cannot ignore such a record of sacrifice and commitment." My breath caught. For a moment, the world spun around me, the words almost too heavy to bear. Then came the verdict. Custody of Lily Carter is hereby granted permanently to Ms. Emily Carter. Furthermore, this court issues a 10-year restraining order against Mr. Daniel Carter prohibiting contact with Lily Carter without court approval. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed like thunder through the chamber. The sound reverberated in my chest, final, absolute. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the gallery erupted in murmurs, some in relief, some in outrage, but all electric with the shock of resolution. I gasped, tears blurring my vision, and pulled Lily into my arms. She clung to me, sobbing quietly against my shoulder, and I stroked her hair, whispering over and over, "It is over, baby. We are safe. We are safe." Across the aisle, Daniel exploded. "This is a sham," he shouted, leaping to his feet, his voice cracking with rage. "She stole my daughter. You cannot do this." His lawyer tried to pull him back down, but Daniel shoved him aside. His face twisted in fury. The bailiffs moved quickly, grabbing his arms as he cursed and fought against them. "You will regret this, Emily," he roared as they dragged him toward the doors. "You hear me? You will regret this." But his voice was drowned out by the shuffle of boots and the heavy slam of the courtroom doors closing behind him. The image of him being dragged away his tie, askew his face red with anger, burned into my mind. Not as fear this time, but as a symbol of defeat. The mask was gone. The world had seen him for what he truly was. The gallery's whispers turned to open judgment now. I heard fragments. She raised that girl all her life, and he just wanted the money. Their sympathy turned toward me, their disgust toward him. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of public opinion shift in my favor. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered their cameras, flashing microphones thrust toward me. I shielded Lily with my arm, my voice firm. "There is no story here beyond the truth. A child was abandoned and raised with love. That is all anyone needs to know." I guided her through the crowd, my heart still pounding, but steadier now. When we reached the car, she collapsed against me, whispering, "We won, Mom. We really won." Tears spilled freely down my cheeks. "Yes, baby, we did." In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded swiftly. Word spread through Knoxville and Nashville about the trial. People who had once whispered about me stealing my brother's child now whispered about his greed, his lies, his downfall. He had poured money into lawyers into a flashy defense, but when the truth came out, it left him with nothing. His debts mounted, his reputation shattered, his so-called friends disappeared. He was left with no daughter, no inheritance, and no dignity. Meanwhile, life in our little apartment shifted. The air felt lighter, as if the constant shadow had lifted. Lily walked with her head higher, her smile freer. At school, she excelled more than ever, her teachers praising her focus, her drive. She told her friends she wanted to be a doctor, and for the first time she said it without hesitation. At night, when we sat together at the table eating takeout or reheated leftovers, she would look at me with eyes full of trust and say, "We are okay now, right?" And I would nod my throat tight because for the first time in 15 years, I believed it. Yet even in victory, the scars lingered. I could not forget the way Daniel's voice had filled the courtroom, the way he had accused me, the way the word kidnapping had been hurled at me like a weapon. I could not forget the fear in Lily's eyes as she faced the possibility of being torn away. Those wounds would take time to heal. But healing had begun. One evening, weeks after the verdict, I sat in our small backyard, the sun dipping behind the Smoky Mountains, painting the sky with streaks of gold and purple. Lily sat beside me, flipping through a science textbook, her lips moving as she read. I closed my eyes, letting the peace settle into my bones. For years, I had lived braced for the next storm, waiting for the next knock at the door. Now the silence felt like a balm, a promise that the worst had passed. The consequences for Daniel were harsh, but they were his to carry. The restraining order meant he could not approach us, could not call, could not intrude. His threats had been silenced by the gavel's strike. His pursuit of money had left him broken, while my pursuit of love had left me stronger. Justice had been done, and though it did not erase the pain, it gave me something more precious. It gave me freedom. The courthouse chapter had ended, but the story of healing was only beginning. In the days after the verdict, I felt like I was living in a new world, one where every breath no longer carried the weight of a brother's shadow, one where the word kidnapping no longer echoed in my ears like a curse. For years, I had braced myself for his return, for the storm that finally came, but now that it had passed, I was left with a silence that was both unfamiliar and comforting. I woke one morning to the smell of pancakes. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. But when I stepped into the kitchen, there was Lily standing at the stove, her hair tied back carefully, flipping pancakes onto a plate. She turned her smile shy but proud. "Breakfast is on me today, Mom," she said. My throat tightened as I sat at the table watching her move with a confidence I had not seen before. This was not just my daughter. This was a young woman stepping into her own life, freed from the uncertainty of whether she would be taken from me. We ate together, the pancakes slightly burnt but perfect in their imperfection, and she talked about her biology class, about a project on genetics, about how she wanted to apply for a summer program at the University of Tennessee. I listened, my heart swelling with pride, thinking of the night 17 years earlier when I first held her in my arms, abandoned, unwanted, and how she had grown into this determined, brilliant girl. Healing came not in grand gestures, but in moments like that. A week later, we drove out to the Smoky Mountains. The air was crisp, the leaves turning gold and red, the horizon painted with autumn fire. We hiked a trail together, our footsteps crunching on the gravel, the forest alive with bird song. At a clearing, we stopped to rest. Lily sat on a rock, her eyes scanning the horizon, and she whispered, "I feel free, Mom." I squeezed her hand, fighting tears because that was all I had ever wanted for her freedom from the chains her father tried to wrap around her. She asked me if I thought Daniel would ever try again, and I shook my head. The restraining order was iron and his reputation was gone. More than that, the girl he once saw as a bargaining chip was now a young woman who had spoken her truth in front of a judge and an entire town. His power was broken. Healing was not forgetting, it was remembering without fear. At school, Lily blossomed. She joined the debate club, her voice strong and steady in competitions. She volunteered at the local children's hospital, shadowing nurses and doctors, her eyes shining as she held tiny infants and soothed them with gentle hands. Teachers pulled me aside to praise her, to say she had leadership, that she inspired others. Each word was a balm on my heart, proof that the years of sacrifice had not been in vain. Every parent-teacher conference, every late night helping with homework, every overtime shift to pay for her books, it had all led here. But healing was not just for Lily. It was for me too. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to rest. I spent evenings reading on the porch, the air sweet with honeysuckle, the sound of cicadas humming like a lullaby. Friends who had once kept their distance returned, bringing casseroles, laughter, companionship. My old friend Margaret from next door stopped by, often her husband Bill waving from across the yard. They had testified for me in court, and their support had deepened into a bond like family. "You did good," Emily, Margaret said one evening, patting my hand. "You gave that girl a life." I smiled, tears in my eyes, because hearing it from someone else made the truth sink deeper. Still, shadows lingered. Sometimes at night, I woke with a start, hearing Daniel's voice in my dreams, accusing, threatening. The memory of his rage in the courtroom replayed in my mind. But then I would hear Lily's steady breathing from her room, or her laughter drifting down the hallway, and the fear would fade. Trauma does not vanish overnight, but love has a way of dimming its edges. Months passed and life settled into rhythm. Lily turned 16, her birthday celebrated with friends crowding into our small backyard balloons tied to the fence pizza boxes stacked high. She blew out her candles with a wish she refused to tell me, but her smile was radiant. After the party, she hugged me tight. "I wished for us to stay just like this," she whispered. My heart swelled. "We will, baby. We will." Meanwhile, news of Daniel's downfall spread further. I heard from a cousin in Nashville that he had lost his apartment, that creditors were after him, that he was seen drinking alone in cheap bars. I felt no triumph in that, only sorrow for what he could have been. But I did not dwell on him. My focus was here on the girl who had saved me as much as I had saved her. Healing also meant rebuilding dreams. I had put mine aside for years, but now, with stability returning, I enrolled in a community college course in writing, something I had always loved but never had time for. Lily cheered me on, teasing that soon we would both be students comparing notes. It felt strange but exhilarating to nurture something for myself again. One evening in spring, after a long day, Lily and I sat on the porch watching fireflies spark in the dusk. She leaned against me and whispered, "Do you ever regret it?" I looked at her, startled. "Regret what, raising me?" she said softly. "Giving up your own life." My throat tightened as I pulled her closer. "Never," I said firmly. "You were never a burden. You were my purpose. Without you, I would not be who I am." Tears filled her eyes, and she hugged me fiercely. "I love you, Mom. I love you too," I whispered. That exchange was the heart of our healing, the affirmation that love chosen and nurtured was stronger than blood abandoned. As the first anniversary of the verdict approached, I reflected on how far we had come. The fear had lessened, the whispers in town had faded, replaced by respect. People who once doubted me now nodded with admiration. They saw not scandal but resilience. They saw a woman who had fought and won, not for herself, but for her child. On a warm summer evening, we gathered with friends in the backyard. Bill grilled burgers, Margaret brought potato salad, laughter filled the air. Lily sat with her friends, her face glowing, her future stretching bright before her. I watched her, my heart full, knowing that healing was not about erasing pain, but about building joy on top of it. Later that night, as the stars spread across the Tennessee sky, Lily and I sat together again. She asked me, "Mom, do you think blood makes a parent or love?" As I looked into her eyes, steady and wise beyond her years. "Love," I said. "Always love." She smiled, and for the first time I felt the full weight of peace. The fight was behind us. The wounds would always be part of our story, but they no longer defined us. We had faced betrayal, abandonment, and lies. We had walked through courtrooms filled with judgment. We had endured threats and tears, and we had emerged not broken but whole. Love had carried us. Love had won.